Welcome. So today we're going to explore what is the meaning of ecopsychology and understand its origins and how and why this is very important for us today, for all humans, for our whole species. Ecopsychology, first of all, is a journey that takes us from the ego to the eco. It strives to integrate the ego, which is our conscious mind, with our eco, which is our surroundings, by perceiving our community and environment as an integral part of the self. What we understand by self is our whole mind, our conscious and unconscious. And this is reflected in our behaviors, in our values, our communication with ourselves and with the others. Many identify the roots of ecopsychology in the Enlightenment, around the 17th century, the time of great inventions, the time when science started to dominate, and great progress was happening in every sphere of knowledge. And this happened at the same time as reality was divided into two parts. There was the reality of the material world, material nature, and it was the reality of the internal world, that of the mind and of the emotions. However, this was not exactly new. It very much grounds itself over a much more ancient theory, for which we have to travel back to ancient Greece and meet with one of my favorite philosophers, Aristotle. This great man teaches us that basically we are made of three parts. The ethos, which is our values and principles. The logos, which is our rational mind. And the pathos, which is our emotions. And since about 500 years ago, our human mindset started to become more and more logos-oriented, dominating the other two aspects. So the logos, being our rational mind, dominating over the other two aspects of our human nature, our values and principles, and our emotions. Let's stay a bit longer in ancient Greece, then everything will connect. Plato, another fantastic mind of the classical times, and he tells us about the eidos. Eidos is the world of ideas, is a parallel world to ours, where everything exists in its perfect form. And what we see and observe in our own world are only projections and shadows coming from that world. And each one of us perceives them differently. So now we can travel back to 17th century. Because French philosopher Descartes bases himself a lot on the teachings of these great classical minds. And he comes with a definition of the Rescogita, which is also our name, and the res materia. The Rescogita being the realm of thought, and the res materia being the realm of matter. And the division is clear. There is a line that has dominated science and knowledge until today. The inner world and the outer world are separated. Let's now move forward a few centuries and let's enter the birth of psychoanalysis and meet Sigmund Freud. And at some point, he started reflecting. It was, I think, 1919, when in some of his writings, he started to reflect about what happened in World War I. And that's what he called a collective psychosis. And at that point, he started to doubt if the purpose of psychoanalysis was to bring back people to normality. Was the normality actually so violent and senseless as the World War? Was that the normality that psychoanalysis was bringing people back to? Following his observations of World War I brought a lot of today's ecopsychologists to wonder, to think if that mass psychosis could be compared with what we're doing today to our planet, to our biosphere, to our society, heading towards destruction. Is this also mass psychosis that we're living right now? At the same time, Freud's colleague, Carl Jung, came up with a theory of archetypes. And for the first time, it is allowing the idea of a collective consciousness. Collective consciousness. A blueprint on how the world works we are all born with. He called it a 2 million-year-old mind, which strongly resonates with the concept of ecopsychologies, of community and biosphere being very, very interconnected. And the 20th century, so we are approaching today bit by bit, a milestone is set not by a psychologist, not by a psychoanalyst, again by a philosopher, Heidegger. And Heidegger tells us about the subject-object relations as the illness of our time. You see, Heidegger believed that the Enlightenment created a shift which started in Western cultures and then it spread globally. And that is how the world got divided into subject, which is me, and object, which is everything else that surrounds us, be it individuals, communities, nature. So, on top we have the subject, me, on the very top of the scale. And all around us are objects which are functional to me, are useful. They are tools for me to reach my purpose and goals. This extreme individualism, almost narcissistic, as everything that surrounds me has to serve a purpose to me. And there we have, what purpose would individuals serve to me? How are individuals functional to my goals? What about communities? How functional can they be to my purpose? What about the non-human world? How can I use it to my own advantage for me? And then Heidegger made a second layer. On top we have the subject me. Right below we have the useful objects, the functional objects. And far below are the non-functional objects, the ones which are useless to us, or the ones that we don't even perceive their existence because they're not useful. And here again we have individuals which are useless to us, have no purpose, communities which have no function, and the non-human world, or parts of it, which can serve absolutely no purpose to my personal goals. And that's what Heidegger calls very much the illness of our time. And he sets a very important milestone into the establishment of ecopsychology in the decades to come. So perhaps he was actually setting the grounds for ecopsychology, because he stated that the cure for this distorted vision of subject-object relations is simple. Well, it's simply said, because he calls for the elimination of the object by making everything part of the subject, me, and have a human individuals identify with each other, identify with their communities, and identify with the natural world as an integral part of the self. Therefore, removing the object, this culture would end, starting a new one. So we come into today, and ecopsychology sees its birth around the 1990s. And just to be specific, when we talk about ecopsychology, we talk about its two aspects. On one side, we have ecology. Ecology is the study of the external realm and earthly interactions between everything that lives. And psychology is the internal realm and mental life. And ecopsychology is the Rescogita, res materia, coming together. Ecopsychology bridges the division between matter and mind, between in here and out there in nature. And we cannot separate the mind in dimensions isolated from the sensory world that surrounds us, removing the perception of nature as an objectified mass without identity and subjectivity and how we experience it. So if we look at psychological practice, until not long ago, psychology and psychoanalysis dealt very much within the spheres of the persona, of the ego, and of the self, and looked for distortions, malfunctions, illnesses, which happened within this part, and inside, to heal it, to heal the persona, to heal the ego, to heal the self. And this was very much an introverted part. Ecopsychology does not deny that. The persona and ego and the self, they do need healing, and they do need care and be looked after, also by professionals. But ecopsychology says yes. Yes to work on the persona, yes to work on the ego, yes to work on the self, yes to work on the community belonging, yes to work on the biosphere belonging. Because these two have been ignored for too long not to be taken into account. So we're going to look now into two of the most prominent ecopsychologists today. And one of them is the person who set the grounds for this new scientific field. So I'm going to quote now Theodore Rorschach, author of the book The Voice of the Earth, which is probably the first, but also one of the main texts to introduce a person to ecopsychology. And he said, we are facing an environmental and social crisis, and we need a strategy that does not rely on shame and guilt and seeks positive motivation that can change mindset and even provide a reward. So we need to ask individuals and the collective response to this crisis. And in order to do that, we can either appeal to their sense of duty and accuse humans, saying, look at what you've done. That is not likely to succeed very much. We have another option. The second option being appeal to stronger, proactive, and affirmative emotions, bonds of loyalty and love towards the self, one another, life, and the biosphere as a whole. This is much more likely to succeed, to foster action and well-being. Again, continuing to quote Rorschach, we are part of this natural world where we evolved and were mothered us into existence. And this is the foundation of ecopsychology, the quest of finding ecology inside human psychology, and to find psychology within ecology. And that is a big game changer if we look at the world today. Separation from the world happens from childhood, with formal schooling programs, where we can see something like hostility between humans and nature. And youth are not involved in the developing of an ecological consciousness. And what is the result? Simply the inability to hear the voice of the earth, because those ears are untrained. We analyze every issue and break it down in particles to find solution to the problems we face. That's our habit. That's what we've always done. Not always, perhaps the last 500 years. And we make those problems smaller to become clearer. However, the core of ecology, which is a science of connectedness, where forms of isolations are artificial, it becomes just a human construct, meaning that whatever part is separated from the rest and analyzed needs to be reconstructed and reintegrated as part of a whole, because that's his nature. His nature is as a whole. Now we're moving to another great practitioner and ecopsychologist of our days, who made extensive and fantastic writers and is also a fellow podcaster, Martin Fisher. And Martin Fisher says that we are alienated from nature, cut off from the depths of our human nature, traumatized by everyday life. We deeply want the recollective side of ecopsychology. People feel disconnected. How often have you heard this term? I feel disconnected. I heard it quite often. And that translates as, I am hungry for reconnection. Ecopsychology gets us back in sensory touch with the wild and developing ourself, our ecological selfhood, because it does exist. It has existed for much longer than our rationality-dominated age. Ecopsychology is a very different kind of animal than psychology. It is the psychology we have needed for the last 50 years. It is one that adopts an ecological view of the reality and pursues all the radical transformations in the psychological enterprise that this view implies. And most of all, it is about remembering how we belong to the earth, and everything about us came out of the land, and our interrelationship with the countless other than human beings. That human well-being is synergistically linked to the well-being of the planet. If the planet fares well, we fare well. If the planet is ill, we are ill. Therefore, ecopsychology would only really make sense if it is committed to building an ecological society. Therefore, the scope of ecopsychology is not limited to the psychological practice and psychoanalysis, but a radical transformation of our mindset. And that is what is required by the conditions we live in today and the challenges we're facing for the survival of our species. Would like to end this broadcast with a quote from Martin Fisher. In sum, ecopsychology is not something that just is, something we can point to as a relatively well-established field or discipline. Its meaning, it's still being decided. There has, in recent years, been a movement towards a more mainstream development of ecopsychology, which means you listening, me here, Martin Fisher, my colleagues in my company, we're all pioneers right now, explorers, trying to discover the future and present science that will lead us to a healthier, wealthier, happier society and individuality. Thank you very much for listening, and remember to follow us on www.rescogita.academy, and till the next time.